Today, I'm announcing that we will launch a consultation on ending vaccination as a condition of deployment in health and all social care settings. Subject to the responses and the will of this House, the government will revoke the regulations. I have always been clear that our rules must remain proportionate and balanced. And of course, should we see another dramatic change in the virus, it would be only responsible to review this policy again.
So I went down to my local garage today and picked up this newspaper. And the headline? U-turn on mandatory jabs for NHS workers. Now, I wanted to read through this news article with you, but first of all I had to go pick up some essential supplies. This included a bottle of bubbly, but only the cheap stuff, as I don't like the taste of it, and it's only 10 AM in the morning. Once I'd got myself home and settled, I was ready to start shooting with you guys. Oops. Now, this is a big win for reason, a big win for logic, a big win for freedom, a big win for our human rights, a big win for bodily autonomy, and a big win for all of those NHS workers and care workers who have stood their ground firmly to ensure that they weren't coerced into taking a experimental vaccine with no long-term data. Now, I'm just pro-choice. I believe we should all have a decision on what we put in our bodies. And going back to the Nuremberg Code, that has always been the way that we always should be able to have the choice about what is put in our body. So a big thank you to all those NHS workers that went out there, protested, threw in their uniforms to show that they're standing strong. A big thank you. And this, this is 70,000 people that were going to lose their career for standing up for what they believe in, standing by their right to decide on this. So a big thank you to all those people who stood up for themselves. I'm sure there's going to be a lot of people very relieved this morning to hear this news. I know that tens of thousands of you out there have gone through all sorts of stress, including myself over the last months around this decision to mandate this vaccine to anyone who works in the medical field or social care field. So let's read this with me. Today's paper, Monday, the 31st of January 2022, the Daily Telegraph. U-turn on mandatory jabs for NHS workers. And it says, Javid is to scrap requirements after warnings it could lead to a shortage of 80,000 workers. Mandatory COVID vaccinations for NHS and social care workers are to be scrapped, the Daily Telegraph can reveal. After warnings of crippling staff shortages if plans went ahead. Sajid Javid, the Health Secretary, will today meet with fellow government ministers on the COVID Operations Cabinet Committee to rubber stamp the decision on the about turn. Multiple government sources says that ministers were expected to end the requirement because the Omicron variant of COVID-19, which is now dominant in the UK, is milder than previous strains. Right, okay. The move comes after warnings that almost 80,000 healthcare workers would lose their jobs because they had declined to take 2 doses of the COVID vaccinations. The Royal College of Nursing, the Royal College of Midwives, and the Royal College of GPs have all pushed for the requirement to be delayed, with warnings of a catastrophic impact. The jab requirement for NHS workers was meant to come into force in April, making this Thursday, which I believe is the 3rd, the last day the staff could get their first jab to be fully vaccinated in time. The legal requirement for care home staff to be fully vaccinated came into effect in November. However, an estimated 40,000 people lost their jobs over the policy, who, under new rules, are expected to be able to return to work in the sector. I reported on this at the time. They did a review with lots of unions and other advisors telling them that this should not go ahead as a mandatory. This was the wrong decision, but they ignored these pleas and they went ahead anyway. Let's carry on. Care home representatives expressed dismay last night at the handling of the issue, saying that the flip-flopping had devastated our workforce and brought providers to their knees, and it certainly did. The decision was moronic and disproportionate. The change of approach reflects Downing Street's increasing focus with how the UK must Learn to live with COVID. And this is what myself and others have been saying for a long time. This is not going away. No amount of these jabs is going to stop the fact that, it will replicate, it will mutate. To carry on down this path, you're looking at having repeated boosters to continue this. We've got to learn to accept that this is there and live with it. And the restrictions and the mandates and the direction that this was going was never going to continue to work. And so mandating these workers to have the first couple, even though down the road then they're not going to be able to sustain making sure that a lot of these people keep having to keep their jobs, to keep having these boosters. It was never going to continue that way. So why should people have the first two to ensure they kept their jobs? So the change in approach affects Down the Street's increasing focus of how the UK must learn to live with COVID. As the Omicron case surge fades, stripping back the restrictions and the policy interventions adopted earlier in the pandemic will be cheered by a group of lockdown skeptic Tory MPs frustrated with Mr Johnson's approach. Before the key meeting to sign off the policy change today, a senior government source familiar with discussions outlined the arrangement for ending the requirement. He says, Omicron has changed things. When we first introduced the policy, it was Delta that was the dominant variant. That was very high risk in terms of how severe it was. For Omicron, whilst it is more transmissible, all the studies have shown that it is less severe. That has changed the conversation about whether mandatory jabs are still proportionate. Mr Javid signalled a recent parliamentary committee appearance that he was open to a change in approach, saying that mandatory jabs policy was being kept under review. Changing the law to force scores of workers to get COVID jabs prompted controversy and debate when the Telegraph revealed the plans last March. A legal expert at the time said that the only comparable UK laws dated from the 1800s when newborns had to be given smallpox jabs. Matt Hancock, then Health Secretary, had championed the change and Mr Johnson agreed, but Mr Javid has been more cautious about COVID interventions. So let's just talk about, for one moment, someone who challenged the Health Secretary when he did a visit to his hospital to ask about these mandates. He made his voice known, and he shared his issues around this.
What do you think of the new rule to require vaccination of all NHS staff?
I'm not happy about that. So
You're not happy about it? Tell me.
So I've had COVID at some point.
Yeah.
I've got antibodies.
Yeah.
I've been working on COVID ITU since the beginning. I have not had a vaccination. I do not want to have a vaccination. The vaccine's reducing transmission only for about 8 weeks with Delta. With Omicron it's probably less. And for that I would be dismissed if I don't have a vaccine. It's not, the science isn't strong enough.
That's your view. And your views? Do you have any view on that? I respect that, but there's also many cases
I agree with
different views.
Yep, other views,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
and there's another
Yeah.
colleague
Yeah.
who's also in the same position.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I understand that. And obviously we have to weigh all that up for both health and social care. And there will always be a debate about it. But it's
maybe there's an opportunity to reconsider with Omicron and the changing picture, or at least to nuance it and allow doctors who've had antibody exposure, who've got antibodies, who haven't had the vaccination, to not have it, because the protection I've got from transmission is probably equivalent to someone who's vaccinated.
Yeah, but at some point that will wane as well.
But if you want to provide protection with a booster, you'd have to inject everybody every month. The protection's worn off for transmission after 2 months.
Yeah.
Then after a month, you've still got a bit of protection.
Yeah.
So if you want to maintain protection, you're going to need to boost all staff members every single month, which you're not going to do.
No, we take advice on when how much you may.
But it's not going to achieve a practical benefit.
Yeah. Well, we take the very best advice that we can.
For me, this guy is an absolute hero, and what an influence, what an impact he made by sticking his neck out and being brave in front of the whole nation. And it was only 2 days ago that there was a petition launched, which I shared everywhere, and he was the lead claimant in this. It was called the Together Declaration. government to face legal challenge to vaccine mandates, and he was the lead claimant in this. And people were signing this, to call upon the court to uphold the rights of individuals and protect their freedom by rejecting and declaring as unlawful these regulations being a form of coercion, a breach of fundamental rights, privacy and bodily autonomy, an attack on the need for informed consent in respect of any medical treatment, incompatible with all training and practice of medical ethics that underpinned medical care and practice prior to March 2020, discriminative and divisive, disproportionate and unnecessary, irrational in dismissing the importance of natural immunity, and an insult to those whom the public clapped in 2020 safe to work until the 31st of March 2022, but dismissed as unsafe and unwanted from the 1st of April 2022. A great cause that, had already 39,277 signatures at the time of me making this video. However, it would seem that there would be no need for this petition now unless they're still taking legal action against the fact that they had done this. But yeah, the guy is an absolute hero to me. It is unclear when the policy change, once signed off, will be announced. It is expected to be made public before the February the 3rd cutoff for unvaccinated NHS workers to get jabbed. NHS guidance to employers said that all frontline staff who have not been vaccinated should be called into, and it says, continued on page 2. These are massive. These are so awkward to read. And yeah, page 2 is an advertisement. It's actually on page 4. Disinformation. Anyway, page 4. Let's continue. Robert Halfon and Mel Strider, the Tory chairman of the formal meetings from February the 4th, warned that they faced dismissal. Last week, the Health Secretary said that around 77,000 NHS workers remained unvaccinated against coronavirus. Ministers are expected to point out the fact that tens of thousands of healthcare workers were vaccinated after the original policy was announced. Responding to the Telegraph's disclosures that mandatory vaccines would be scrapped for the NHS and care workers, Nadra Ahmed, OBE, chairman of the National Care Association, said, "This decision epitomises the lack of foresight by ministers in choosing to drive the implementation of this policy without producing impact assessment prior to it taking to the vote. Every parliamentarian who voted for it in social care needs to take responsibility for the loss of staff our sector has suffered because of an ill-thought-out policy. Social care has been used as a pilot which has devastated our workforce and brought providers to their knees." Mike Pagdam, chairman of the Independent Care Group of York and North Yorkshire and owner of St Cecilia's Care Service, which operates 4 care businesses, added, "It feels like a bit of a slap in the face." A lot of these owners, management, etc., didn't want to have to, force these mandates into place, and they've been through a hell of a time, losing staff, worrying about. I can hold some sympathy. And, now it would seem a massive slap in the face because now they've got to do a U-turn and, perhaps give these people their jobs back, which they've just fired for this. I can see there being many red faces and many faces feeling like they've been slapped here. I like to think that all those staff that have lost their jobs will get them back again because we need them, which is true. Like, already having, I think it was, we were needing 80,000 jobs in the care worker sector, and to then lose 40,000 jobs through these mandates was just devastating for the workforce in that sector. It is what we argued in the beginning. The vaccine was a good thing, but this shouldn't be mandatory. And it seems that these concerns weren't taken on board properly. Common sense seems to have prevailed now. Hurrah! But there's been a lot of heartache and sleepless nights for people unnecessarily in the midst of a pandemic, when we all said at the beginning that this wasn't the right approach. Absolutely. Absolutely. What this has put people through, what this has put me through, and my family, is... It's been hard. and it's been hard for a lot of people. The amount of stress it's caused, the stress of their lives, their career being threatened, this whole coercion is what it was. This just shows that they don't understand the difference between the NHS and social care sectors, and both need to be strong to support each other. It's understood that the government is anticipating backlash from those carers who lost their jobs as a result of the policy. I'm not surprised. In October, the courts rejected an initial judicial review application that challenged the government's vaccine mandate for workers in CQC regulated care homes. And this is what I did report on at the time. And I showed you the guidance for the healthcare sector, and I showed you that they had reviewed this. Well, they say they're doing a review. They got advised against doing so, and they just completely ignored it.
They do say, they have opposed the introduction of mandatory vaccination from the outset. They say, we have repeatedly told the government that persuasion and not coercion is the best way to roll out the vaccination programme. We believe that these regulations distract from government's central responsibility to boost trust and confidence in the vaccine, so that vaccination levels reach the same rates seen in the NHS in Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland. In our consultation response to the government, we said that all available evidence suggests that mandatory vaccination makes it harder to persuade workers that the vaccine is safe. Their consultation response included new data from a survey of members working in social care and highlights the new academic evidence that suggested mandatory vaccination created barriers for those hesitant about the vaccine. We have also made it clear our concern that this opens up the possibility of discrimination against care workers with the protected characteristics under the Equality Act 2010. We have told government that mandatory vaccination in care homes risks creating dangerous staff shortages in some care homes. During the passage of this legislation through Parliament, Unison briefed MPs and Lords regarding this counterproductive policy and the risks involved. Unfortunately, the government has not heeded warnings from Unison.
However, it is now anticipated that if those who want to get their job back struggle to get them back, will seek legal action and a renewed application. Well, yes. And, I hope everyone does get their job back, or if not, receives compensation for their troubles through all this. So, guys, that was the news today. And, it hasn't been rubber stamped yet. But, the Telegraph are saying that it's when are they going to announce it and not if. This is great news. And, to all you people that have had stress from this, that have had their careers threatened, that have gone out and, protested for their right to bodily autonomy, to their right to make choices about their own body, to keep their careers, to not be coerced, etc. To all you people, I hope that this takes a massive load off your shoulders. I hope that you can go home and celebrate a win for what is right tonight. Thank you for listening, guys. Follow M Seeker of Truth.
So while we will seek to end vaccination as a condition of deployment in health and social care settings using statute, I am taking the following steps. First, I have written to professional regulators operating across health to ask them to urgently review current guidance to registrants on vaccinations, including COVID-19, to emphasize their professional responsibilities in this area. Second, I have asked the NHS to review its policies on the hiring of new staff and the deployment of existing staff, taking into account their vaccination status. And third, I've asked my officials to consult on updating my department's code of practice, which applies to all CQC registered providers of all healthcare and social care settings in England. They will consult on strengthening requirements in relation to COVID-19, including reflecting the latest advice on infection protection control. And finally, Madam Deputy Speaker, our vital work to promote the uptake of vaccines continues, and I'm sure that the whole House will want to join me in thanking NHS trusts and care providers for their relentless efforts in putting patient safety first. Madam Deputy Speaker, I also wish to thank the Shadow Health Secretary and the party opposite for their support of the government's approach to this policy area. One of the reasons that we have the highest vaccine uptake rates in the world is because of the confidence our vaccines that comes from this place, from all sides of the House. We may not agree on everything, but when it comes to vaccination, together we have put the national interest first. It is now in our national interest to embark on this new phase of the pandemic where we keep the British people safe while showing the world how we can successfully learn to live with COVID-19